Hi, and welcome to the next lesson. As I always do, I've started the sketch. I did this so I could save some work. But the trick is basically in using the brush tool and working on the image here. Straight from Illustrator. You can scan your own work in and work on top of that using the template tool as we've seen before. It's quite different to the last one. We did the last one using geometrical shapes. They've all disappeared, and they've left us with a character that gives off much more charisma. Let's do the same thing we did in the first lesson. Let's position the base color onto the sketch and work from there. This time, our base colors are what will start a much more detailed illustration in itself when we start advancing through it. At the start, there'll be flat colors, like in our flat style, but we'll need to be adding more and more depth through light and shadows to them that will be more elaborate than the geometrical shapes we used in the last one. Adding the base colors first is quite common in the realm of digital illustration because it allows us to establish the way we're going to work with our composition. As they say, you can't start building a house from the roof. For this reason, although it's a different style, it still starts from the same base as the rest. But for now, we can see that what varies is our object's appearance. They're now a bit rounder and elaborate. I'm going to put this on fast forward for the rest of the video so you guys don't get too bored. I'm going to limit myself right now to telling you how to work in this style that, if you look closely, has a lot more curves than the flat style, and I recommend really focusing on the figures we want to represent. For example, in the case of the line that I explained in the first style, that is the string that is joining Laika to the ship, I'm also using a line technique that will expand later on. For now, I'm concentrating on filling in the gap to create a more solid base on which to work on. Maybe it will help if you're working with two surfaces with the same tone to use different ones to know what you're coloring. I'm still working with the original color palette. I don't have the old ones, so later on I'm going to download the images I've already got saved of Laika in flat style to get with the dropper tool the colors that we created earlier. That way the tones won't be too different when I generate the colors automatically. What we were saying is that the tridimensionality is pretty clear when it comes to perspective. Right now, you can use the position of the head as an example, or the ears as well, and we can even see that the collar of the harness is a bit above where it should be. It's kind of like adapted to the dog's neck. Or, for example, in the case of fire, it's a lot more evident. The shapes I want to make now are much more rounded instead of having such a pointy form. Maybe in our mind, the fire is a bit more aggressive, but I want to give this image a nicer, sweeter feel. So I'm going to try to use rounded forms to fit it to the style I want to use. The only thing is that there has to be more detail when we're adding in the final touches. But for now, putting in the base colors is fundamental. Here I have a more advanced version of the same drawing where all of the colors are established. The only thing left to do is to prepare a few adjustments. As I was saying, you have to be quite careful with them so that if you're going to print them, there are no last-minute mistakes. And, well, as I said before, I'm going to get now the color palette that we generated in the flat style out to give it a touch of depth that we're looking to give to our illustration. What I'm doing now is using the Curvature Tool to adjust the color a bit because it had shifted a bit from the edge. I'm putting the opacity back. And after making these small changes, we can see the result. This would be the base color of our illustration. Something we'll have to do almost in any work if we want to have anything to work on. This is the illustration we did before, Laika in flat style. And with the dropper tool, we're going to get those colors that I need and haven't been able to simulate in the new drawing. The base colors would be complete with these newly acquired ones. Now we need to work on the lines so it looks more natural. We're going to put it in line mode, and with use of the corresponding window to help us, what we're going to do is modify the line through this mode. For example, I've left the internal part thicker than the ends. Apart from that, I've increased the thickness. This way, it looks like our dog has a cartoon appearance, because these black lines could be simulating eyelids or eyelashes. Putting this small detail in a white tone makes her look brighten all the way up, and it's a good touch to add some life to our character. The modifications we're making now are done through the direct selection tool and the pen tool, the main tools I use in all my work. After adding a few more touches, we're going to get a much deeper stare than what we had in our first drawing. And with the contouring around the mouth, it's going to give us an expressiveness that, in my opinion, it's quite impressive and it looks indispensable in a drawing like this one, in a comic style. The objective behind these styles are more than anything to transmit emotion to the reader. For this, right now, as we have Laika's face, we can see that we've decided on a quote-unquote happy expression. Although the story is quite sad, I want the illustration to reflect the achievement that this little pioneer did for future generations and what we've achieved thanks to her. Okay, now it's just a question of working with the light in a more intense way. With a flat image as a reference, what we're going to do is move this idea around, basing ourselves on what we found on Pinterest. Our drawing has gone from something flat to something tridimensional. And for this, it has more perspective than before. Something I also noticed myself working with a lot is the clipping masks. What I want to say with that is that if any moment I believe these objects don't fit, it's not anything different. It's just through the methods I mentioned beforehand, the clipping mask. What I do is I copy the object I wish to fit again, I paste it on the same place, and then I select it again. Next to the top layer, right-click to create a clipping mask. I also want to say that this is the option with which I've worked. The appearance and style of my comic is a more personal thing. Everybody has their own way of creating these types of illustrations. It's important to create something similar to a character's design, to see that they are capable of showing expressions, concrete positions, and that they show us something we might see in a graphic novel. This type of illustration allows us to get into the editorial field, as it's an interesting way of telling a story with its impression. What we're going to do now is to increase the irregularity of the shapes we're working with to eliminate the possibility of perceiving the cold feeling that symmetry can give off. For this reason, we want to find something more dynamic, something that has more emotion than the static flat style can give us. Working with the opacity in this case is a good option. There's no set convention really. Another example, when working on the moon, we see that we go from simple ellipses to something more random, a more deformed shape, which gives more impression to our illustration. I'm not following any established steps to this. In this case, in the case of the moon, I'm simply letting the pen work for me to show all of its irregularities. Now, the only thing I'm doing is finish fitting the layers where the shapes I'm working with are. And the only thing left would be to add lights and shadows and, those small details that aren't there yet. But they're very small things that's, sometimes the more I change, the more options I can see, in the drawing, the better the quality and appearance with which we can work. For example, the legs or the gaps I'm doing right now between the legs isn't something we have to do, but I wanted to do it obviously to finish my drawing so it looks better, so there's not much left to do now. All we have to do is add the texture, which is something we're going to do in the next lesson, okay? So I will see you guys in the next lesson where we're going to do that, and I hope you enjoyed this. See you later.